everyone, welcome to Hack On live stream again, and we are here for the progressive web app session. We have Ranjoy Sen, who is currently a staff software developer at Collins Aerospace and has been in this industry for 15 years. So, welcome, Ranjoy.
Hello everyone. Yeah, um, Let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. We start off with main presentation. Well, thank you for having me here. Giving me this opportunity to share a talk in progressive web applications. A quick introduction to myself. My name is Ranjoy Sen. I'm a staff software at Collins Aerospace. Live in Bangalore. I have around 15, close to 14 years of experience in mobile application and enterprise architecture. Yeah, I'm a father, fitness enthusiast, and pretty much hackathon lover. I believe in open source, develop many of the SaaS-based products under the open source software licensing. You can actually visit me in YouTube or even in GitHub, and pretty much into the rollingarray.co.in. That's where I put up all my projects. So get some time to look into it. Cool. So let's see what we have in our agenda today. So we're going to see a little bit of users' behaviors and how does user perceive applications. We're going to see PWA, what exactly it is. We'll get a little bit technical around it. We'll get into some of the UX, UI considerations for building PWAs. We'll get into designing offline features. We'll get into hosting. Now, a quick demo of the application, and we'll try to conclude what we have seen so far. So let's start off with the journey of interest of understanding users' behavior. So when I was looking at my phone today, I was actually getting into a little bit of botherness. What I see about 30% of my applications or my storage is pretty much taken up by the applications. Whereas when I start looking into my city suggestions, I pretty much get around a couple of applications, only changes here and there, but mostly I get into a same application stack as a suggestion from city. So there must be something going around here. I have a lot of application which probably I'm not using a lot from my phone. So that's one of the reasons why Siri is giving me only fewer suggestions on a day in and day out. So let's see what exactly we get out of it. The behaviors is so common that around there is a study been done. There are 61% of users who concluded that they actually, what is the behavior about installing applications. One is they don't want to install applications pretty much because of one of the reason that they don't have enough space on their device. So pretty much they don't want to waste applications which is like used once and then dumped it to their phone. They don't want to do it in that way. People play around with very few handful of applications, which is also in the case of me. Maybe for many of the users that is the same use case. Most of the applications or apps, they comes with default advertisement which hinders users experience over a period of time, and then typically they just forget about what they have installed onto their phone, and that been trashed to a larger extent. So that's been said. If we do a quick study between users engagement and the web reach, and then try to compare between the web application and the mobile application, we see the mobile applications has got about a 30% less reach when it gets into the web applications on a web reach standpoint. Whereas when you get into a user's engagement, whereas user want to use an application, there the mobile application has a humongous 67% of growth in comparison to a web application. So we see a problem. We see a little bit of solution also, that we see a problem in terms of the users do not use mobile web applications a lot because they keep forgetting about it. And then how we solve this problem? Perhaps we probably try to marry these things together, whereas we build up a tech stack where the applications are reachable to a larger extent, as well as the user engagement is even proper. So how do we get into that? And that's one of the reasons why progressive web applications were introduced. So progressive web applications are there for every single operating system, and pretty much about every single devices, including your HoloLenses, Xboxes, which are gaming engines. They have got access towards your file system, your camera, photos, pretty much to a larger extent of your low-level APIs of your operating system, so that these applications can access them. And that's one of the reason why progressive applications are very, very widely used these days. Um, so then, if we have that, then how does a progressive application stands out from a general web? So you have your website, which is nothing but the information centers, which we call it as usual websites. And then we have web applications, which are nothing but adding users engagement, and then your personal content via sign-ins and sign-ups, and they have got some advanced features. That what we call it as web applications typically. Progressive web applications, or PWA, takes web app to a little bit more extent, and then introduces notifications, offline content, and typically add to your home screen so that you can access applications straight away from your device's home, which you tend to use for any of your mobile application or even for desktop applications. Um, and then PW has got a few characteristics, without which we can't conclude that what the difference still lies between the web app and the PWA. So what are they? The first one being responsive, which means that a PWA is supposed to work across device orientation, device real estate, starting from a smaller screen to a larger screen. That's as simple as that. It should be linkable by default, which means I should be still be able to pass on a link of my PWA, a certain route, towards anyone, and they should be able to tap and then get to that particular page straight away. It doesn't have to be installed and then get to it. So that's how linkable is. It should be discoverable via my search engine. So SEO works pretty well for PWAs. Mm, it should be installable to your device, which means I should still be able to access them from my home screen, irrespective of whichever platform I am onto it. And then it should be more an app-like feature, which means it should not feel like you're visiting a website, rather than it should feel like you are utilizing an app. So that's the difference we got to make in a PWA. It should work in connectivity independent, which means the offline work, it should work just offline, and that's one of the key aspects of PWA. It should be secured by default, which means I should still be able to access them, should not be able to access them without SSL, and that's one of the key characteristics of PWA. I do not have to bother about updating my application, unlike a mobile application where I probably have to spin up my deployment servers multiple times to get things updated and let my user know that, hey, there is a new application available to the store, and you can go ahead and download the application to get the new features available. That should be a default to PWA, so it should be auto updatable. It should be re-engageable, which means I should still be able to reach out to my users via notification layer, and then share and then start pushing them a lot more info, typically the way any mobile application does. And should be progressive in nature, which means I should still be able to, the user, when they visit the pages, the content or the assets in the application should be downloaded over a period of time. It should not be like a dump to your screen in one shot. Let's say that I'm building a PWA which cost about 10 or 20 MB. My client should not have the 20 MB straight away on the first screen. It should be progressively download to your screen as and when you're visiting those pages. So those are the characteristics of PW, and that's what they differentiate in terms of a web app, and a PWA for that matter. And the characteristics are such good that there has been some good adoption, or rather early adoption of PWAs, and the stories are pretty much available on the internet. You can probably read more than that. Some of them are Starbucks, Pinterest, Z5 as a streaming servers, Twitter Lite is very, this particular was something even Google featured in their stories. Forbes as one of the news sites, and Flipkart being one of the e-commerce sites. So they are all have adopted PWAs in the early ages, and they have still got a lot more advantages in terms of knocking off their web application and having PWA as one of their sites. You can actually read more of these kind of stats at pwastats.com. Please feel free to look at that. Well, yes. So if you see a lot more benefits in PWAs, a lot more adoptions there. So let's get a little bit technical around uh, how do I build PWA of my web application, and what are the things I typically need. Uh, the first one is PWA Principle Assets, and they're typically five. Uh, the first one being a web app manifest, and we'll discuss each of them a little bit more details. The second one being service worker, application shell, uh, app icon, and startup images. So let's see what exactly is a web app manifest. So web app manifest is nothing but a JSON file. Typically, it is on some of the applications even call it a web app manifest. Uh, but irrespective of the name, it has got few details, just the way a JSON structure holds. It has got the name of the application, the theme color of the application, background colors, icon stack, startup images, shortcut links about your application. So whole and soul, um, how do you how does a browser would perceive your application is what been documented inside a manifest JSON file, and typically it is at the root of your application layer. And then you have your index HTML file. So index HTML5 has got this connectivity with your manifest. Um, and apart from that, it also sometimes for iOS specific domains, it has got some of the links about your startup images. Android works a little out of the box. For iOS, we got to still put up the startup images for an application. Typically, the splash screen, what you use for your mobile applications, they get introduced to the HTML index, and that's pretty much rest the web app manifest in terms of PW as a whole. Uh, and then we have something called service worker. But before understanding service worker, we got to understand what exactly a worker and a server worker is. So let's say that you have your web application, right? And at any given point of time when you open up a web application, this is what typically happens, that your web application loads to your browser, and the moment you tap on any of those click buttons or anything which you are seeing on the screen, typically fires up something called events, and they are essentially holds up into something called callback queues. So they comes as and when they occur on the events, and via something called event loop, it pushes to call stack. And call stack is something like a queue, I would say. It is the first in first out queue. So each time a call stack gets one of the event, it typically holds the main thread of your application and does the job. So you could very well be able to understand that every single time there is a call stack which is catching hold of one of the event, it is taking out the entire main thread. So the main thread is always clocked to your events, one event at one point of time. And that's one of the reason, if you see your web application hangs for a while, that's probably one of the reason that that particular event is doing far more complex job than it's supposed to be, and it's taking up almost all the memory utilization of your threads. Well, to solve this particular problem, in many of the languages, we have something called threads, right? Multiple threads or sub threads, and that's typically what your worker does. So your worker basically spins up its own worker thread with something called as a worker JS file. So your worker JS file is nothing but pushing some of your events, which are um, predominantly far more complex in nature or time taking. We push it there, and then does the job on its own onto a separate thread. And once it is done, it pushes back the message to your web application. So your it basically works along with the post message web APIs. The communication really happens there. So typically you don't have, so the workers doesn't have access to the HTML layer of your web application, neither the JS layer. So they work pretty much on the post message web API. So that's something which is critical about the workers thread. And then we introduce something called a service worker, which typically does the same thing. It has its own worker queue, but it works on the network request proxy. It works as the network request proxy, which is a little bit different than the worker.js. So worker.js does the heavy lifting of a certain operation, whereas service worker typically does the network proxy layer and then still sends back the data via post message API. So how does service worker work? So let's see when you tap on a browser on a certain URL, what really happens? At the first shot, it makes, or any even at the simplest possible web application or website has got something called index.html, and that typically is nothing but a HTTP GET request or HTTPS GET request, either of that, and that reaches to your network, and your network reaches to your application server, pulls out that page. If that page is available towards your application server, your network gives you HTTP OK 200 OK, which is a status code, says, hey, I'm all good. And then that page gets loaded to your web application. That's as simple as how any web application works even today. Now, the story is a little different when you reach to a no network zone or an offline zone. So your web browser still makes the request, but you are offline. Your system is unable to reach towards network. So eventually, your browser won't be able to reach out to network, and furthermore, any communication with your application server will be blocked. So what will happen? Your browser would typically take off its own offline page and will show it to you. And this is what happens at Chrome. Based on what browser you are into, you can typically see a simplistic, your page is not reachable towards something like a game even. In Chrome, you can typically play this Dino game at your risk. Uh, right. So this is what happens when you're into offline. Now, when service worker gets introduced to your application, the flow becomes a little bit different. What happens is that your browser makes again a request, but your request, before it reaches to network, it reaches to service worker first. So service worker would come to know that, hey, my web application has made a certain request towards a page or an API or a stat or a asset. It could be anything for that matter, right? Now, along with service worker makes a request towards the network to get the latest data from the network, it also starts caching the data, which has been requested typically. Um, and then what happens is that when you are in a normal network zone, your service worker gets the updated data and then shows it back to your web application. But when it is offline, service worker sees that there is no network which is possible. What service worker does is pulls out data from the cache storage and then gives you the offline data for your typical web application. So in that way, we would be able to make our applications work pretty much pretty much anything and everything in an offline zone with service worker. So that's what the benefits of utilizing service worker. And then that's something which is basic, but apart from that, service worker can do far more complex job than this as well. Now, before building or implementing service worker, there are four typical things which the developer needs to keep in mind before they implement that. The first one being the scope of service worker. The service worker has got the scope which is under, the service worker can work in the client scope only, which means I cannot have my service worker to run on a totally different domain. Between abc.com, service worker cannot access service worker of xyz.com. That's not possible. So the scope is extremely important. Service worker cannot work without SSL layer. So if you want to utilize service worker, your domain must be SSL, or HTTPS for that matter. Otherwise, service worker will not work. Under the hood, PWA will not work. The maximum scope of the service worker is inside that particular folder. the location of service worker. So I cannot have or pull out service worker file. The JS file cannot access something which is a totally different route, even if it is inside the same domain. So it is under the same content of that particular file. And then the fourth one, and probably the most important, is that service worker cannot access your DOM, which is document object model, which means service worker cannot um, update an HTML page, which probably would have got the data out of your service worker or the worker JS. It cannot go and update them straight away, and that's typically not even allowed in many of the programming languages thread model. Your UI is supposed to be updated over main thread only, and the subthreads cannot access your UI layer. So that's even typically applicable for service worker as well, since it's work on a separate thread. Well, we talked about the application shell, which was our fourth point on the PWA principle assets, and the fourth point was application shell. So, what is an application shell? When we build web application, we typically try not to bifurcate between what is my UI and what is my data. We try to merge things together, right? Most of the cases, and that's how most of the server rendered pages also work. They typically have UI and API, UI and databases mix call from the same application, um, and then render towards your UI. Well, from there we got to think a little bit different. We got to think in terms of a shell. A shell is typically how a shell really works, whereas your application UI supposed to be inside a shell, and then your data supposed to get from the API layer. So that's the bifurcation which you got to make typically in terms of designing your PWAs. And why it is important, because when service worker will start looking into your application and what needs to be cached, it would start caching the application shell, which means your client logic could be cached, your local assets in terms of maybe JSONs, maybe HTML, maybe your images, everything will be start caching. But it won't start cache your server side context, which means it will not cache the DB pieces. It will not be caching your maybe the server side pieces. So that is typically the bifurcation in terms of shell and your data. And that's how it is. That's how if you bifurcate it properly, your PWA would work in the right way. Now that's been said, now PWA has got a lot more support in today. As I'm speaking, it has got a very good support across multiple browsers, which you probably use at your day in and day out job. uh, the maximum is for Chrome, and Chrome for desktop as well as Chrome for Android phones has got the maximum support. But as you can see, the red is not too much. Right? That's a good sign, which means most of the features of PWA are supported across multiple browsers. Something like add to home screen, which is available across multiple browsers. Offline content is available across multiple. Theming colors is something which is pretty nice, is what I feel is available across multiple browsers. Service worker support is very much there across browsers. But having push API, which is essentially your notification pieces, are still not there on the iOS Safari stack. So you should still be able to have push notifications to your desktop if you are using Chrome, no matter which OS you are into. And your Android Chrome browser, you should still be able to access push APIs, which essentially your notification layer. Well, so PWA is not just about the tech stack or the JavaScript pieces. It is also about the UI UX consideration. If you remember, the characteristic what we talked about had something called responsiveness. So let's start the detail discussion about how does UI UX affects PWA as a whole. So PWA, when you develop something like that, it would still have some some out of the box support in terms of installing that PWA, but you still should still be able to promote your installations or install option of your PWA from different ways. And these are five of the very proven ways, I would say, when you want to promote your UX for install. You can have that install button that your application is installable at straight away at your landing page of your application. It could be part of your headers of your application, could be part of your feed. Let's say that you are developing a news-based site. So in between feeds, when the user is reading a new feed, you might just want to pop up and say that, hey, this particular application is available as PWA. You might want to install that. If you are developing a game, maybe at the end of the game, when there's a scorecard appears, maybe there you want to promote your PWA installation. Or typically you might want to have a stable install button at your menu phase. So what you see from here is that the install button is not supposed to be something which is hidden somewhere at your application. It should be very, very visible, which means that unless until the user is installing that application, you must let the user know, okay, hey, there is something like install which is still available. Otherwise the user might not even know, because as I said, most of the browsers apart from Chrome doesn't really say that this is a PWA. So you should be able still be able to promote your installation ways so that your users comes to know about that. Now, it doesn't matter how effective your backend APIs are, your DB implementation are. This is not something which you want to give as a user experience, because this UX is not useful for probably most of us on this universe. Rather, what you would try to emphasize more on is the responsive mobile first design, where you should start thinking about mobile as a first class citizen of my application, and not something where I need to think about like, okay, let me develop my application for desktop, and I would start doing my tweaks to make it visible on the mobile phones. That's not the way. You need to think that your users are first gonna see your application on their phones first, and then later on, if they are onto their desktop, they might want to open up in their desktops. But if you start thinking on the other way around, you probably would lose most of your users on the first glance itself. Right? So mobile first design is something what you need to exercise for your PWAs. And as PWA says that you're not supposed to have something like m.pwa.com for mobile and just pwa.com for your desktop. That's not how PWA works. So PWA has to be responsive across your devices instead of real estates. Well, so when we start thinking about web applications as a whole, we do not care about offline in general, right? Because we always think that the user has to be online to make a URL call, right? That's how we think as a developer, but that's not a typical case even in today's world. So let's see how does it work. Why offline experience is extremely important for a PWA as an application. Well, there are typically four factors of a network fluctuation. And let's understand that. Your user could be a totally poor coverage from your network provider, right? It could be a bad weather condition which is hampering your network. Typically, the throttle of your network is going up, going down. That could be because of the bad weather. You may have a fluctuating weather or power outage, which essentially pulls down your network, and eventually your users' experience about your application goes down. And last but not the least is that your users might be traveling, and they might be traveling from a full network zone to a no network zone altogether, right? And that's four typical reasons. And in most of the cases, you might want to experience that your users are never off to their mobile devices. So essentially, your user might just want to use your application even they are offline. And hence Google wants to raise their bars in terms of offline capabilities of PWA, and they typically says that the install button of as a PWA which pops up from your Chrome, it will not be unless and until you are supporting an offline page for your end user. As because even in today's world there are about 63% of users who are into mostly on a 2G network zone, which typically means that if you are if your application pulls off a JS file which is say about 5 MB or an image which is of 10 MB, you will not be letting your user to pull that file in your 2G network, because that will hinder their total experience in terms of when they are using that application. So that's something which you want to improve as a developer. But how would you develop? What are the strategies you might want to implement when you think about offline experience for your end user? So be simplistic. Think that whatever you're seeing on the screen can be cacheable. Think cache as default, right? And let your user know that, hey, there is something like offline which has happened to your phone. Your phone is in offline right now, or your device is offline right now, but you should still be able to um, get your data or read your content even though you are offline, right? The second is save offline. So let's say that your application is has got a long form to be filled, maybe around 20 forms, and the user really needs to think about it while they fill out the form. It's not something which is easily done. Even while filling out the form, which is a long running task, the user might just go offline. And then that typically means is that the user is now, if they want to save their data in whichever state they are, they'll not be able to submit their data unless until they are offline. That's a bad experience, because maybe at their 19th field, the user is offline, right? You won't like to delete all the data what they have entered. So have a local cache implement at your application layer, using index.js or something like that, index.db, which pulls in the data from your phone or your forms, and then start storing them. And once you are available, your network is available, then you take the data from there and send it to the API layer, which you're supposed to do, and they let the user know that, hey, you can still fill out the form, but we will send out the data once your network is available. In that way, you're making the user happy. uh, Prefetch content, which means that, let's say that you are reading again a feed related application, and then, so the moment you're opening up the application, you will not like your users to keep keep looping around whether there is a new content available to your application or not, right? Let your user not to hunt for the data, but you can always take that extra step towards looking out whether there is a new data available to the application, and then make that call, make it available to your users, and let the user know that, hey, there are new content available, would you like to refresh your screen, and then read more about that. Unless, so it's more like a pull request rather than a push request. So you're pushing data back from your backend servers, feels like a push request, whereas you're pushing the data back from your backend servers and saying that I will let you know when there is a data available. You don't have to hunt for it. Yeah, that's what pre-fetch request is all about. Data save mode, as I said, you would not like to download a 10 MB image on a 2G network. Rather, what you would like to do is that give that user an experience that, hey, there is an image available, and that image is supposed to be a blurry image or very, very low resolution image. And let the user know that, hey, you can load your image or download that image by tapping on load. Yeah, that's how you can save your data, because data is precious across multiple countries. So you might want to take that extra step towards not download the data which the user don't even want to do. Yeah, so make that data saver mode enabled. And probably the last one would be that heavy content download. So let's say that you are having a video played towards your application. You might want to let the user download that video content on a Wi-Fi or a faster network, and then when they are offline, they should still be able to view that video, maybe on an offline mode or even on a 2G mode. So in that way, you are doing a lot in terms of giving user that experience with that deserve when they visited your application or downloaded your application, right? And make user happy by even making these strategies in terms of offline caching. Well, there are many times where I hear that question, that where do I host PWA? What are the key characteristics or key infrastructure I need um, to host something like PWA? I can host a web app or an HTML website, but is something different I need to do for PWAs? Let's answer that back. In a simplistic way, if your domain is supported by HTTPS, you are ready for PWA hosting. It's as simple as that. Unless your domain is HTTPS, service worker will not work. So under the hood, PWA will not work, right? So that's one of the reason. Apart from that, you still be able, if you do not have a domain, you can still have your PWAs hosted via Google Play Store as something called trusted web activities. Now trusted web activities are something which is not an Android application as a whole, but you still would need Android Studio to make that file. And that file is typically a content which let the Google Play Store know that, hey, there is something called like this, and you can host it for me. What eventually happens is that it would still be listed in Google Play Store, and then eventually your users would be able to find it out through their search, as typically of any application. But the good piece, there is a bad piece. The good piece is that it is a typical PWA, so it still uses the Chrome instance with removing the URLs and the title bar and the bottom bar, the menu pieces. So your application is going to be full screen to your device, and it will be able to access anything and everything which a PWA can access. But if you think that you would start making a lot more plugin based calls as you make a hybrid Android application, that's not going to be the case. So you don't have access towards the plugin model, or unless until that plugin is developed for PWA. Right, so that's how your trusted PWAs or trusted web applications can be used to host PWAs at Google Play Store. Well, that being said, there's a quick application which I developed only for this particular event, and it's called Event Grid. You might want to scan up this particular QR code to straight away get into the URL, or you can visit eventgrid.rollingarray.co.in to get into the URL. And the code of this particular application is available at my GitHub profile. You might just want to visit it there to see how does it work. So let's see how the application is. I'll just go into the line zone. Probably yes. Okay. So what you see on my left hand side is the application, and what you see on the right hand side is typically the phone, my Android phone, on the right hand side. As you can see from the screen, that there is something called like a small option, something like install application. So it has understood that this application is a PWA, and hence Chrome is promoting the install app. You can actually have this through a custom built install option as well, which I had shown earlier. So that's what, when you tap on this, even then you get something like the same call appears. I'll get to the installation a little later. what I would actually do is that the same thing can happen even at your Android screen. On your Android phone, you still get similar kind of an experience when you get into the menu of your application, or the same options are available at your menus in your Chrome, which is the install app. Typically, what I go is I'll go ahead and tap on this to install the application. Um, I'll let it get installed. It might just take a couple of time. I would go and look out for if that installation is available. Meanwhile, yeah, the installation has already been done. So this is just like any other application what you download from Play Store, uh, the same as that. I'll tap on this, and as you can see, it has got a splash screen, which happens to be on any mobile application. And then it pulls down the data. And the similar experiences you get a full screen application, which you get for any mobile application for that matter. Now, what I'll do is I'll probably try to get into an offline mode. What I'll do is I'll kill this application. I'll go into my I'll go into my airplane mode. I'll make my airplane mode available just to make sure that my phone is offline. I'll tap on the application once more, and let's see if the data is available. So as you can see, the data is available, and this is pretty much making a feed towards my API to get the data. And on top of the screen, as you see that it says that you are offline, which means it is letting the user know. This is something which you usually see in mobile applications, but even in PWAs, you can make these, these effects. What I'll go is I'll make my thing as airplane mode again, and then in a moment when the network is available, this message goes off. Right. Now, what I'll do is I'll probably make my phone silent, and what I'll do is I'll quickly make a notification call, and we'll see if the notification really works well. So what the intention is that I want my phone to awake based on a notification, which typically happens in a mobile application, right? So let me fire up a notification, and let's see if that works out. So as you can see, we have received a notification at my Android phone, which says that yes, you should still be able to access notification layer. On the desktop, to be very honest, what I would go is that I can go ahead and make it installable, and then this would appear as the normal installations, or normal desktop applications which you typically install and then download. Yeah, so even that can be done. Okay, so let's look something else, right? What is that? How? So I have built applications. Now, how do I understand that whether my application is a PWA or not? So let's understand that from here. Okay, let's pull off my network. Okay, no. Yeah, maybe I can use this as well. So I can typically get into the inspect column from, since this is a normal web application, I can still use the inspect column from here just to see what is happening, the way I debug in a normal web application. What I can do is I can get into the performance applications for that matter, and then look out for this manifest file. So this typically reads your manifest file to understand what are the things so it needs those icons, and this is available. It needs those web manifest, and it needs those service worker. So this all been together, which means you can still make sure that yes, I have the right kind of an asset to make my PWA. Now, there is still a little bit more than that. So there is something called Lighthouse. It's a extension Chrome, and I can go ahead and do a quick report generate for something called in the category of PWA. progressive web apps. And let's see. So this will do all the cross checking, and this will find out whether your application is a PWA or not. And if it is yes, then it will give you this check mark. And this is a really important tool for PWA. And then you can start looking for every single bit, whether you have done right or done wrong, and where you can go and make things better. Okay, so a lot into the demo. Let's get into the code a little bit. Maybe we can do a little deep dive inside the code just to understand what are the key ingredients to make a PWA. So I'm using Angular for this application, and with Angular, if you get into your app module TS, you would still have something called service worker module is something which you need to import, and service worker module under the hood makes something called NSW worker.js. So this is typically your service worker file, which gets generated when you do with your build layer, right? This is not available usually when you develop, but when you start building up, or we are done with the build, this file gets generated. But how does this file generate? This file gets generated from something called ngsw config.json, which is essentially part of your angular.json config. So inside your angular.json, if you scroll through a little bit in terms of projects, application, and architects tab, there inside your configuration menu, you have something called service worker true, and then ns config path, which is the config.json. And based on this JSON file, your service worker JS file gets generated. What are these files? So let's understand a little bit more about this file. So usually the NS service worker configuration has got multiple asset groups, and you can create as many asset groups as you want. Typically, you don't have this data asset group, but you still have the asset group in terms of the application, what kind of files it needs to prefetch. So as you can understand, it is fetching out your feb icons, your HTML layer, your manifest, your CSS, and your JS files. So out of the box, it is getting cached. In terms of assets, it is pretty much taking care of most of your assets of your application. And then you can even customize if you are utilizing a different asset than this. For me, I am also making my API cached. So in my data group layer, what am I also doing is I'm adding the API URL, which I want to cache specifically. And that depends upon you, how you want to cache your which piece of API. The maximum age which I've set for an hour. So what I am saying that my API data is going to be available for an hour to cache, or more than this, it's supposed to fetch the data. After till 1 hour, it will cache. After that, it will go for another fetch. And then the freshness or strategies, I'm saying freshness first, which means I am saying that get the data when network is available, right? And there are different strategies you can maintain. And then 5 seconds, which means I'm saying that if till 5 seconds I'm unable to fetch the data from network, fall back to the offline mode. That's what I'm saying for this particular API. Right? So these are the three important parts of your service worker. And then once it gets built, probably I can show a little bit into the. So when you build your application, you typically get something called www. There you get all the files, and there you have something called ngsw worker.json, which which were getting path as your Angular module. So there, I think I can get into this JSON file that will give you a much better. So this particular JSON file has got something called your URLs. What is that you're caching? Every single data, it's typically getting cached through this URL. And when your PWA gets updated, they actually look into this particular JSON file to see whether I have an updated data or not. If I don't have an updated data, I would still hold back with my normal or my cached JSON files or the application. If there is a new update, I would be able to load the new data from the network. That's how the service worker, this particular integration out of the box works. Okay, let's get into the presentation. Let's see what we have left out. So is PWA right for you? A very important question which we need to answer, right? What we have seen so far, there are the answer could be it really depends, and this is not a way to discourage the fact that you should not build native applications. No, that's not the case. But which are the cases you can still look out PWA as an option, right? So there are 10 specific areas which typically developers or clients look at when they decide upon which tech stack they want to follow. So mobile friendly is first of all. As you see that the mobile friendliness is very much there with PWA, with responsiveness and all. PWAs are very much installable the way it is installable for your iOS or Android applications, the same as for PWA. PWAs are well SEO indexed, and this is a good point, because your mobile applications are not SEO indexed, and yeah, they are, but they are through your app stores or play stores SEO indexed. But if you want to have to do your SEO on your own, then there is a little bit of less options available. Whereas since PWAs are typically web-based URLs, you can go ahead and make your SEO the way you want. um, Offline mode, as you see that offline mode pretty works pretty well the way you have your Android or iOS based applications. Notifications, as you see, can wake your users up if they have forgot about your application for a very long time. Although notifications for iOS is not yet available, but it depends upon whether your users are more at an iOS, Android, or desktop stack. You might want to take a step, and if notification is an extremely crucial feature you want to get in, then perhaps PWA is not yet at there, because it doesn't have the iOS level support. um, Bypassing marketplace, this could be something which as a developer you want, as a developer or the someone who is hosting that application might want to take a look, because your applications are typically hosted in your play stores, which are costly, right? So if you want to bypass that, and still want to have all the good pieces of an app, make your applications installable to your end user's device, then PWA could be a very good choice. Low data, as you see that your when you develop PWAs and typically use something like Angular, you can use Angular strategy routing strategies to make sure that your users are downloading those pieces only which they are visiting. So let's say that I have 20 routes in my application. The JavaScript pieces or the HTML pieces about those 10 routes need not to be downloaded at the first shot when they visit the first page. They can be progressively downloaded, but that's not something which can happen for your mobile applications, because they tend to download the entire source code or the entire application in one shot. So if your application is about, let's say, 70 MB, then your user has to download that 70 MB exe file, or your installable files, to make sure they start utilizing that application. But for PWA, it's not the case. They can still start utilizing the first page and progressively download the data which they want to visit. It requires no updates, and that's a great feature on its own, because when I start developing applications, I am always onto a stack that, hey, okay, I am making these changes to an API, to a feature, I'm making a bug fix. How soon this data, or how soon my end users would start utilizing that? And I typically have to send my users a lot more information around, hey, there is a new update, and multiple strategies. There are far more strategies applicable for a mobile application update to be available. And there are many applications which are such heavy in size, you don't even update them quite often, because they need higher bandwidth connections and all. For PWA, that's not the case. Your application is auto updatable. So as you push your application as an update, your users will come to know, and then we can build out those strategies. If you look into the GitHub project, you will actually be able to understand what are the pieces written to make those code or those strategies applicable. And the last but not the least, the share and linkable feature. So let's say that I'm again visiting one of the link and I want to share that link with my friend. For a mobile application, I would let the user, my friend, has to download that application first and then visit that, right, to that particular page. For in PWA, that's not the case. you should still be able to share that link, and then your user or your whosoever you are sharing your link should still be able to straight away access that without making any installation options. And these could be some critical thinking path in terms of which tech stack you want to follow, whether you want to go native way or going to go PWA. But there are a lot more which is happening around PWA, so start thinking around that, if PWA is or could be a choice for you. Well, that's been said. I stand my presentation here, and I'll open up for any questions. If you have, you can reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and then let me know if you have some questions. I would still be more than happy to answer them back.
Hey everyone, if you have any questions, please add them in the chat. We have 5 minutes left. So I don't think we have any questions. So I would.
Okay.
So thank you,
Sure.
Ranjoy, for taking this session, and it was really insightful. And I really like the last part where you just told us which tech stack to use and when to use it. So
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your
Thank you for
time.
having me here. Yeah. Have a great day ahead. Bye bye.
Thank you everyone for
Bye bye.
joining in.